back from another part of the world, Australia. Father Andrew McMahon of the Catholic Church. You're a man of Lurgan these days. You're there looking after the spiritual needs of the people there. And with Kingsley Sutton, a good friend of this program, on Thursday night, not Wednesday as I've indicated earlier, Thursday night at 8 o'clock, the pair of you are in Mary's on Hill Street, and it's an ecumenical togetherness. What's happening there?
It's what's technically called in these parts a common act of worship.
Wow.
And it's run under the auspices of another very wordy group known as the Southdown Ecumenical Clerical Study Group. Known for short, really, in these parts as the Southdown Clergy Group.
Yeah.
The Southdown Clergy Group is a fraternity of Protestant and Catholic ministers who have been meeting regularly since they formally came into being in April of 1968. And actually, they're the longest clergy fellowship of their kind in Ulster.
In some way, you know, that could be the cement that has kept us together.
Arguably so, yeah. They came into being basically out of a desire to explore ecumenism and inter-church relations at the end of the 1960s. Some of the Catholic clergy were interested in the kind of stuff that was coming out of the Second Vatican Council and what that meant in terms of inter-church relations. But what actually happened, as we know, very, very soon, just a few years into their existence, the Troubles erupted and they had a big impact here in Uri and in places like it. So what happened is this group, which actually came together to begin to explore ecumenical and theological difference and so on, ended up becoming a kind of a listening post or a talking forum for community leaders, at least in church terms, who were beginning to respond to what we now call the Troubles.
Yeah. So you had moved out. You had moved out from the limitations of religious men, ministers and priests working together, to include other people as an influence at the start of the Troubles.
Yeah, one of the things that this group actually did was, one of its first acts was to come together and organise public acts of worship. And what Kingsley and myself are doing leading on Thursday night of this week comes in that tradition. The first gathered people together for prayer and common worship in Rostrevor. Actually, it was the Great Northern Hotel.
My goodness.
In Rostrevor in January of 1968, and they have been having a public act of this kind, a common act of worship, as they call it, since 1968. And what happens in this particular week every year is at some location in Southdown, a church is identified by the group, the clergy group, to host a gathering of this kind. And the group rotate from year to year from a Catholic church to a Protestant church. And if the service is being held in a Protestant church, the group invites a Catholic speaker and vice versa. So it's always in the speaker, the guest speaker is from the other, if you like, side.
So you're the guest speaker
that's the way
on Thursday.
I'm coming, and it's in the Church of Ireland. It's been several times in St Mary's in town here. And indeed, this service has been held over the years often enough in Uri locations. We've had it in the Dominican, we've had it in the cathedral. And it's part of what's called used to be known more as the octave, but in real terms, the Week of Prayer for Christian Unity, which runs from the 18th to the 25th of January every year. And there's a kind of momentum this week every year. And this momentum is kind of very much noticeable in Britain and Ireland. In the mainstream churches, there's a focus on Christian unity. There's prayer and reflection around it. And you'll see in various locations services of this kind occurring this week. There's one in Lurgan at a cross-community level where I am on Wednesday night. There's one in Belfast tonight.
You'll be prayed out this week.
Well, absolutely, yes, and talked out as well.
But this unity we speak of, I might have thought away at the beginning of the journey that the unity had to be a unity of an organizational unity that the Catholics and the Protestants would get. But no, it's a unity of camaraderie. It's a unity of prayerfulness unity of spirituality,
Yeah.
where you can actually, without threat to the other,
Yeah.
be there together.
Yeah, it's interesting how words evolve and concepts evolve. I mean, right up even perhaps until today, many people, particularly in the Protestant churches in Ireland, tend to view the word ecumenism as a statement of aspiration towards uniformity.
Yes.
And often clergy, maybe particularly in some of the non-conformist traditions,
Yeah.
have a difficulty with that. And in many ways, that's how ecumenism might have been understood in the 60s and 70s. And it was seen to be the preserve of those people who were really into a kind of church amalgamation of some kind.
Yeah.
And it is gradually, partly because that has come to be seen as not something that's waiting to happen around the corner, ecumenism as a concept has kind of been transformed in its understanding in Ireland and in Europe. Now to see how people can contribute to togetherness and oneness and unity of spirit without necessarily compromising denominational positions or whatever. Yeah.
Is it an easier concept for Kingsley than it might be for someone from the Free Presbyterians, for example?
It would be a much easier concept from the point of view that there wouldn't be an ecumenical tradition within a church like the Free Presbyterians. Denominations of that kind would be very clear about being strictly non-ecumenical. And again, to step back, they would be using the word ecumenical in that sense, in the older sense, it was about giving up and surrender.
Taking over and all of that.
But I think Kingsley would be coming from the tradition who would see ecumenism in that wider sense, as I would, as traditions living alongside each other and enriching in one another and learning from one another. And what I would say is probably throughout the Church of Ireland and the Anglican Communion, that understanding is well embedded by this stage. And in this country, among the Protestant traditions, I mean, the Church of Ireland, I think, have given strong and persistent leadership in the ecumenical scene. And nearly any locality you'll go into, you'll find them ecumenically interested.
Is there an age demographic here that you and Kingsley and men of your era are up for it? But the older guys who have been around a long time, in their mid to late 60s perhaps and beyond, that it's too much to go for?
Curiously not. In fact, groups like the South Down clergy group that I was describing in the beginning was in its heyday in the 70s and into the early 80s. It's declined in its influence. When I say influence, in terms of its capacity to draw younger generations of clergy into it. And in fact, its golden age, I say, was maybe 30 to 40 years ago. And one of the concerns that group would have had, and quite legitimately would have, is the fact that many of those who were leading lights in it a few decades ago retired and moved on. And the group often became something of a retirement club, or at least it developed that kind of image, because it wasn't that successful at recruiting younger generations of clergy into it. And that I mean, there's a whole range of dynamics at work there. One of the perceptions is it's simply that clergy are thinner on the ground nowadays, and they don't have time to go off to things of that kind. A Church of Ireland clergyman, I remember telling me a few years ago, he reckoned, even looking within his own tradition, that younger clergy spent less time nowadays meeting other younger clergy, even within their own tradition. They were more into family and commitments and so on. So that clergy fellowships, their kind of era had gone a bit. So curiously, not necessarily for anti-ecumenical reasons, for human reasons, for lifestyle reasons, clergy going to clergy fellowships, ecumenical or otherwise, has actually reduced.
But your work to the bone, for goodness sake. You're in Lurgan. You've had 40. How many funerals have you had since last year? You're just constantly working.
Yeah, it's very constant, and
it's not easy.
Yeah, and particularly in our church, with a reduction in the numbers of clergy progressively, you kind of feel you spread more widely. And certainly the time that you had not just in terms of the physical time, but almost the energy to go to something else reduces a bit. And all these kind of what are perceived to be extras kind of suffer a little bit in consequence of that. I was kind of lucky there that I had a good 10-year stint in Uri, which left me, in some ways in the heart of South Down, within easy reach. The main traditions are all well represented in the area, and I found it kind of relatively easy to stay in touch with the ecumenical scene. And perhaps if I'd been out on my own somewhere and carrying a different kind of load, that might not have happened,
Workload is of huge importance here, because if you've done 40 or 50 funerals, it's not just the day of the funeral. Your thought process begins 3 days before the burial. You're constructing the homily for the day, and you've got to renew that every time.
That's right.
As somebody who does a column every week in the newspaper, I know how difficult that can be.
And one of the things one of the things I say is that you have to, as well as the dynamics of carrying out a funeral, you have to very quickly and at short notice, which is the nature of death and funerals, get to know a range of people very quickly and get to know them reasonably well and get to know their understanding of the person they've lost and get to understand what that person meant to them. So it's emotionally very engaging, and you have to be invested in it. And then the point is, 3 days later, you're moving somewhere else to do the same thing again. And one of the things about big town ministry is that very often you're speaking to the same congregations week in and week out because it's their cousin's dead today, it's their aunt last week. So you have to be fresh and attempt to be fresh. It's something you're meeting on a regular basis. So the demands of regular ministry have allowed probably ecumenism to maybe go a little bit marginal. And certainly I think that's probably how a lot of clergy have experienced it. There's also a sense too, which would be only fair to say, the dynamics of ecumenism more generally have slowed down, in the sense that if you put yourself in the shoes of clergymen in Warrenpoint and Rostrevor and Uri in the late 1960s, and the troubles are escalating, and there's real disintegration happening in the community. So you're going to value any forum that's going to be giving you an opportunity to get an insight into how, for example, a Protestant's thinking about this, or vice versa. A little bit of that urgency has gone out of the situation, obviously in ours, for obvious reasons, in Northern Ireland. And the other thing is, at that time, going into another person's church to attend worship was radical. Hearing a Catholic preaching in St. Mary's Hill Street would have been unusual and very, very novel. Whereas those things have become more taken for granted. So in consequence, the pace of things have probably slowed down. These kind of experiences have, as I say, become more habitual, and therefore, again, you can see how clergy will say, well, there's probably nothing new in that. I've been at that kind of service
But it's a sign of success from the founding fathers, because if you've taken it to a moment where you no longer have to go on the crusade or the pilgrimage of togetherness, that it's happening rather more naturally, then you've been doing something right over the years.
I would say that certainly in terms of, for example, the congregation there in St. Mary's Hill Street, for example, or if you were going to the cathedral equally in Hill Street, I mean, they will take it in their stride nowadays to welcome people of another tradition and to see clergy of another tradition in their church and to be listening to a clergyman from the other tradition or another tradition preaching. That has become quite natural and acceptable, which you say is a sign probably of how the extent to which we have normalised those things, and that's an achievement.
How long now have you been a priest?
My 22nd year.
22nd year. Yeah, you could have been a broadcaster. you were in a production company doing stuff at one stage. Yeah. What drew you? At what age did the call start coming to you?
Yeah, I would say just as I was coming to and leaving school age.
Really?
And what drew me wasn't hugely spiritual or hugely religious. I would say I was quite invested in community and in community-based activity, active in the GA and organisations like that. And I was very much given to doing something that was community-orientated and community-based with my life as I saw it. And I remember, kind of looking around and saying to myself, to some extent, I'd always been reasonably active in the life of the church and parish. In terms of those organisations that are rooted in community, in politics and local government, you could say is one of them, journalism's another, and social work's another, I suppose. I felt that one that was rooted in pastoral ministry and priesthood is one that I thought I could do, and one that I thought I could stay with, and one that I thought that had basically a raison d'etre or an ethos that was as compelling as any other, if not more so.
Indeed, if not more so.
I decided to, as the thing goes, try my hand at it.
Yeah.
And like everything else, and I mean, it's a cliche probably, but people will tell you this about ministry and about training for priesthood or ministry in other churches. You know, the reason you start isn't the reason often why you stay, or it isn't the reason why you persevere in the end. And I went through, I suppose, a lot of thinking and came to very different motivations in the course of time, and have continued similarly right through those last 2 decades to constantly be operating out of a different maybe motivation or a new motivation as my outlook on things change, and it has changed quite a bit over the years. So the reason I started isn't the reason I stayed.
I understand. You know? I understand. And that
where I'll be in 10 years if I'm still in ministry will be probably for very different reasons.
Yeah, but it's a lovely honesty to say if I'm still in ministry, and that's not suggesting you're not going to be, but nevertheless, it's an openness to the evolutionary journey.
Yeah. And I'm more and more convinced. I mean, I couldn't have spoken this way when I went to Maynooth the first day I was ordained in Newry Cathedral, but I could see now more and more the hand of God at work in my life more clearly and more concretely than I'd have seen 10 or 20 years ago. And that's, I mean, I'm hopefully more in touch with my own sinfulness and my own limitations than I was then too, and I've matured and copped on in lots of ways, to some extent. But I can see God's hand guiding now that I look back at the story much more than I could have seen then.
He's a clever God because He gives us the freedom to come to Him in our own way.
And to come and go, within that relationship.
To come from the zero spot you were at to now having a knowledge of the presence of God.
So, and in that way, I give thanks for the tradition of the churches. We can have ambiguous relationships with them and with the institutions that are our churches. But in some ways, they provide, and certainly my church has for me, they provide some kind of a shell within which you can grow and explore and come in and out. I hope so, anyhow. You don't have to be, in a sense, signed up all of the time or similarly committed all of the time. And I mean, I think one of the things that has happened certainly within the Catholic tradition is that, I mean, that has become the reality for more and more people and more clergy as well. And we recognise we're dealing with a very diverse church and very diverse experiences and very diverse starting points.
Diversity and starting points bring me to yellow ponchos in the Philippines and Francis. He seems to be a great fellow. He's doing marvellous things.
Yeah, he certainly has made an impact, and he gets a very positive and very attractive kind of coverage. Or he can manage this in whatever situation he seems to find himself, and that kind of has helped his appeal grow. There's no doubt about that.
I see him as a kind of gunslinger for Jesus, because he comes out with stuff. He was throwing punches the other day, talking about if anyone insulted my mother, I'd punch him. And then he's going on from that. Catholics, you don't have to breed like rabbits is the next one out.
Right, okay.
But there are ways of managing this, and there's a vernacular. He speaks in the vernacular that people understand, ordinary people, and that gives people encouragement.
Well, the fact he's coming out of that Latin American experience is interesting. And the break from the long European tradition of papacy is no bad thing. And it breaks the mould a bit. And in his own way, he's breaking moulds, I suppose,
It was very funny when the announcement was made, Habemus Papam, Cardinale, and the name was mentioned. And Brian Dobson, my colleague in RTE, who had been broadcasting away, comedy, was waiting for it, and the silence fell. But there was about a minute and a half before Brian could say another thing because he didn't know who this man was.
He wasn't the
and there
name
was
on the
silence.
page,
He wasn't
yes,
expecting it.
yeah.
And you can leaf him through the book.
Yeah.
Who is this guy? Who
Yeah,
is this
yes,
guy?
yeah.
And that was
Yeah.
that's the way
to
it
find
shook
something
down.
to say, yes, yeah.
So tell people what they're going to get on Thursday night.
Well,
That's 7:30.
Yeah,
at 8 o'clock.
Yeah, the Common Act of Worship, as it's technically known, it's probably round about an hour long.
Yeah.
It'll follow the same pattern as it has done in recent years.
Mm-hmm.
The text and the format are laid down by an organisation called Churches Together in Britain and Ireland, who are kind of an umbrella group for ecumenical activities. And one of the things they do is provide resources for this week of prayer. And they lay down a theme and a text for the gospel and for services of this kind during this week each year. This year, their theme is the key gospel story in services in Britain and Ireland is John chapter 4, the Samaritan woman meeting Jesus at the well. And that's the key text, and we're all invited to adhere to that and explore that as the background for
Have you your
preaching.
homily written yet?
No, but I I'm engaging furiously with this text every minute I get in Lurgan.
It'll come.
There's actually the key text that has been laid down is the phrase within that passage, "The well is deep," where the woman of Samaria says to Jesus, when he talks about his living water that he's going to give her, if only she would ask, she said, "Look, the well is deep. You have
why
no
do
bucket.
I need you?
Why?
Where
are you going to get this water from?" And I certainly interpret that as a kind of a cynical remark on her part. It's not a genuine inquiry. She's saying, "You're a great man if you can get into this well without a bucket."
Who do you think you are?
And if you're that good, I don't know why I'm wasting my time coming here with a bucket. So that line, "The well is deep," and you have no bucket, is the key line.
Yeah.
That line, "The well is deep," I suppose symbolises so much. That's the point.
We find buckets in all kinds of places.
We find buckets in
all kinds of forms because we're required to haul on the rope.
And the important thing is that the well is much bigger than our bucket, and in a sense we're only dipping into something that we cannot own or contain or describe or formulate. It's always going to be much deeper than us, and we simply share in what it has to offer us through the limitation that our particular bucket represents. And it's a good enough image for the whole Christian unity situation.
What we do as well when we have a bucket of water, we share it.
And it's life-giving and it's critical to life. And here we are, I'm going with my bucket, you're going with yours. Kingsley Sutton has his bucket, the Presbyterians in the Belfast Road have their bucket, and we're all drawing from the same well. And I suppose the important thing is that we don't get excited too much about our own particular bucket, because that's when we can limit the experience, and that's when we become
open the eyes to look around.
It's the water that matters that we're drawing, and it's the well that we're drawing from. So that's the theme, and that's what I will want to speak about. I'm probably going to say a little bit about the background to this South Down Clergy Group, who say kind of sponsor or foster these services since 1968. Deserve in some way to be recognised, and they've been at it for a long time. Not the same people, but certainly handing it on from one to another. And so we're coming in a long tradition that's been very precious in this area. And I say the South Down Group has survived continuously as the longest existing clergy fellowship of this kind in the North, which is something.
And born straight out of Vatican II, perhaps. Going right back to the enthusiasms.
Its actual origin was in, I'll tell you specifically, was Castlewellan. And what happened in Castlewellan in the years immediately following Vatican II, a Catholic priest there, long deceased, Father Sean Murphy, was having discussions with his parishioners about, discussions in the parish at night about the material that was coming out of Vatican II and its implications for a parish in Ireland like theirs. And they came to discuss the decree of ecumenism, which had come out in 1964. And they decided, why not invite in a Church of Ireland minister to speak to us about what the Church of Ireland's about. And out of that, clergy in the area started to get involved, and out of that South Down Group came into being. And
we've come a long way. And a distance to go still. Thank you,
Okay,
Andrew.
Rowan.
Andrew McMahon, Father
Good to
Andrew
see you.
McMahon. Thank
Yeah.
you very much
You're very
indeed.
welcome. Great.
And that's Thursday night, dear
Great.
folks,
Great.
in St Mary's Church in Newry at 8
Eight.
o'clock. And we'll bid folk farewell across the planet now as we stream live to them. Father Andrew, thank you for coming in. Thank you for being with us. I'm back with you, God willing, inshallah, tomorrow morning, all being well. And we look forward to seeing you then. Go well, and thanks, Andrew. Take care.